3. The Suhrawardi Order. Sheikh Ziauddin Jahib Suhrawardi, following the discipline of the Sufi ancient Junaid, is credited with the founding of this order in the 12th Christian century. As in the case of almost all the orders, Suhrawardi teachers are accepted by the Naqshbandis and others. India, Persia, and Africa have all been influenced in their mystical activity by the methods and personages of the order, though the Suhrawardis are among the most fragmented Sufic groups. Their practices vary from the production of mystical ecstasy to the completely quiescent exercise for perception of reality. Instructional materials of the order are often, to all appearance, merely legends or works of fiction. To the devotees, however, they contain materials which are essential to prepare the ground for the experiences which the disciple must eventually undergo. Without them, it is believed, there is a possibility that the student may simply develop altered states of mind, which render him unfit for ordinary life. Ben Yusuf the Carpenter. Once upon a time, there was a carpenter named Nazar ben Yusuf. He spent all his spare time for many years in studying ancient books which contained many half-forgotten pieces of knowledge. He had a faithful servant, and one day he said to him, "I have now attained the age where the ancient sciences must be used to ensure my continued existence. I therefore want you to help me in carrying out a process which will rejuvenate me and make me immortal." When he explained the process, the servant was at first most reluctant to carry it out. The servant was to dismember Nazar and put him in a huge barrel filled with certain liquids. "I cannot kill you," said the servant. "Yes, you must, for I shall die in any case, and you will be bereaved. Take this sword and stand guard over the barrel, telling nobody what you are really doing. After 28 days, open the barrel and let me out. I shall be found to have regained my youth." So the servant agreed, and the process was started. After a few days, however, the servant, in his loneliness, began to feel intensely uncomfortable, and all kinds of doubts assailed him. Then he started to become accustomed to his strange role. People came regularly to the house asking for his master, but he could only say, "He is not here at the moment." Finally, the representatives of the authorities arrived, suspecting that the servant had done away with his vanished master. "Let us search the house," they said. "If we find nothing, we shall then take you into custody on suspicion, and it is probable that you will not be released until your master reappears." The servant did not know what to do, since by that time only 21 days had passed. But he made up his mind and said, "Just leave me in this room with this barrel for a few minutes, and then I shall be ready to come with you." He went into the room and took the top off the barrel. Immediately, a tiny man, looking much younger but exactly like his master, though only the height of a hand, jumped out of the barrel and ran round and round it, saying repeatedly, "It was too soon! It was too soon!" And then, as the horrified man watched, the little being vanished into thin air. The servant went out of the room. The officers arrested him. His master was never seen again, although there are many legends about Nazar ben Yusuf the carpenter, but these we must leave for another time. The girl who came back from the dead. In ancient times there was a beautiful girl, the daughter of a good man, a woman among women, rare in her loveliness and in the delicacy of her nature. When she was of marriageable age, 3 young men, each apparently of the highest capacities and of great promise, sought her hand. Having decided that they were of equal merit, the father left the final choice to her. But the months passed, and the girl did not seem to be making up her mind. And one day she suddenly fell ill. Within a few hours, she was dead. The 3 young men, united in grief, took her body to a cemetery and buried it in the deepest of silent agony. The first youth made the graveyard his home, spending his nights there in sorrow and meditation, unable to understand the workings of the fate which had taken her away. The second youth took to the roads and wandered throughout the world in search of knowledge as a fakir. The third young man spent his time in consoling the bereaved father. Now the youth who had become a fakir, in his journeyings came across a certain place where a man of repute in uncanny arts resided. Continuing his search for knowledge, he presented himself at the door and was admitted to the table of the master of the house. When the host invited him to eat, he was about to start the meal when a small child started to cry. It was the grandson of the wise man. The sage picked up the boy and threw him into a fire. The fakir jumped up and started to leave the house, crying out, "Infamous demons! I have had my share of the sorrows of the world already, but this crime surpasses those of all recorded history." "Think nothing of it," said the master of the house, "for simple things appear otherwise when there is an absence of knowledge." So saying, he recited a formula and waved a strange emblem, and the boy walked out of the fire unharmed. The fakir memorized the words and the design, and the next morning was on his way back to the cemetery where his beloved was buried. In less time than it takes to tell, the maiden stood before him, fully restored to life. She went back to her father, while the youths disputed as to which of them had earned her hand. The first said, "I've been living in the graveyard, keeping, through my vigils, contact with her, guarding her spirit's needs for earthly support." The second said, "You both ignore the fact that it was I who actually travelled the world in search of knowledge, and who ultimately brought her back to life." The third said, "I have grieved for her, and like a husband and son-in-law I have lived here consoling the father and helping with his upkeep." They appealed to the girl herself. She said, "He who found the formula to restore me was a humanitarian. He who looked after my father acted as a son to him. He who lay beside my grave, he acted like a lover. I will marry him." The parable of the host and the guests. The teacher is like a host in his own house. His guests are those who are trying to study the way. These are people who have never been in a house before, and they only have vague ideas as to what a house may be like. It exists nevertheless. When the guests enter the house and see the place set aside for sitting in, they ask, "What is this?" They are told, "This is a place where we sit." So they sit down on chairs, only dimly conscious of the function of the chair. The host entertains them, but they continue to ask questions, some irrelevant. Like a good host, he does not blame them for this. They want to know, for instance, where and when they are going to eat. They do not know that nobody is alone, and that at that very moment there are other people who are cooking the food, and that there is another room in which they will sit down and have a meal. Because they cannot see the meal or its preparation, they are confused, perhaps doubtful, sometimes ill at ease. The good host, knowing the problems of the guests, has to put them at their ease, so that they will be able to enjoy the food when it comes. At the outset, they are in no state to approach the food. Some of the guests are quicker to understand and relate one thing about the house to another. These are the ones who can communicate to their slower friends. The host, meanwhile, gives each guest an answer in accordance with his capacity to perceive the unity and function of the house. It is not enough for a house to exist, for it to be made ready to receive guests, for the host to be present. Someone must actively exercise the function of host, in order that the strangers who are the guests, and for whom the host has responsibility, may become accustomed to the house. At the beginning, many of them are not aware that they are guests, or rather exactly what guesthood means, what they can bring to it, what it can give them. The experienced guest, who has learned about houses and hospitality, is at length at ease in his guesthood, and he is then in a position to understand more about houses and about many facets of living in them. While he is still trying to understand what a house is, or trying to remember rules of etiquette, his attention is too much taken up by these factors to be able to observe, say, the beauty, value, or function of the furniture. Astrology. A Sufi once knew, through prescience, that a city would shortly be attacked by an enemy. He told his neighbour, who realized that he was a voracious but simple man, and who advised him, "I am sure that you are right, and you should go and tell the monarch. But if you want to be believed, please say that you divined it, not by wisdom, but by astrology. Then he will act, and the town may be saved." The Sufi did so, and the townspeople were delivered through the correct precautions being taken. Saying of Sheikh Ziauddin: self-justification is worse than the original offence. 3 candidates. 3 men made their way to the circle of a Sufi, seeking admission to his teachings. One of them almost at once detached himself, angered by the erratic behaviour of the master. The second was told by another disciple, on the master's instructions, that the sage was a fraud. He withdrew very soon afterwards. The third was allowed to talk, but was offered no teaching for so long that he lost interest and left the circle. When they had all gone away, the teacher instructed his circle thus. The first man was an illustration of the principle, do not judge fundamental things by sight. The second was an illustration of the injunction, do not judge things of deep importance by hearing. The third was an example of the dictum, never judge by speech or the lack of it. Asked by a disciple why the applicants could not have been instructed in this manner, the sage retorted, I am here to give higher knowledge, not to teach what people pretend that they already know at their mother's knees. That makes me think of... Suhrawardi said, I went to see a man, and we sat talking. There was a camel plodding past, and I said to him, What does that make you think of? He said, Food. But you are not an Arab. Since when was camel meat for food? No, it's not like that, said the man. You see, everything makes me think of food.